for assistance and informing law enforcement of perceived threats. To no avail. The abuse continued, and it continues up until this day. The Muslims of America's clearly stated position is that the lies are divisive and have led to violence and religious persecution. While the Muslims of America was not the exclusive recipient of this hate campaign, the organization has been a favored target. Finally, in February of 2013, we filed a defamation suit against one of the foremost groups targeting us. The reasons which we felt necessitated the case were validated when the FBI released an intelligence bulletin in May of 2015, which stated, and I quote, that militia extremists are expanding their target sets to include Muslims and Islamic institutions in the U.S., resulting in increased violent rhetoric and plotting, and has the potential to lead to additional harassment or violence against Muslims by domestic terrorists. Most of the information for the report was gathered in 2013, and we do not believe that it's a coincidence that this occurred the year we filed our lawsuit, stating the same. In addition to the negative articles, usually included are comments suggesting unspeakable acts and vigilante justice against Islamberg and its sister communities. Other threats that Islamberg has faced are bloggers giving out the address of the property and encouraging people to come and see for themselves. Biker rallies planned in 2013, and again another one planned in May of 2016. Trespassing and the mailing of death threat letters. Our concern was realized last year when we were informed that Robert Doggart had been arrested after devising a horrific plot and convening a militia for the purpose of burning down the mosque in Islamberg and other buildings as well. Wiretaps of his conversations with his accomplices show that he planned on killing, if necessary. He was released on house arrest, and he is currently at the Federal Medical Center in Kentucky undergoing mental evaluation. He was charged under 18 U.S.C. Section 247 for damage to religious property and obstruction of religious belief. In the court pleadings, it shows that Doggart was inspired by some of the programs and some of the statements made on television suggesting lies about Islamberg. Also arrested last year was William Tint of Greenville, South Carolina, who was charged with a violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1001 for willfully making a false, fraudulent, and fictitious statement regarding Robert Doggart in a plot to attack Islamberg. In this current climate, people are hiding behind constitutional protections to infringe upon the rights of others, foster hate, cause division, and put innocent lives in danger, and cause a clash that will ultimately destroy this country. These attacks will not stop until citizens and the government stand up for that which is right. And stand up against that which is evil. The filing of this lawsuit is a major step toward justice for Islamberg and justice for the United States of America. Thank you.
We're now open to questions from the press.
I have a question for Mr. Adams. You mentioned at the very beginning of your speech that there was a lack of knowledge of what's going on within the Muslim faith, which leads to fear, which I'm kind of relating to the attacks or death threats or anything kind of emailed along Islamberg and the bombing and just kind of violence towards it. So what is your response to people who are afraid? If you could expand on that, and what are you all doing to increase the knowledge of what you all are about so that people aren't kind of blinded anymore?
Become active. Become active. Become active in your local communities, your schools, religious institutions. The Muslims of the Americas is very active in hosting and holding a yearly United Muslim Christian Forum in where we are educating society and the public about Islam, about what Muslims are, and about not just, how great Islam is, but also how Islam, the tolerance that Muslims all throughout history, Islam has never, not once, even when the Muslims were reigning over different countries and had, were superior in might and force, never once were monasteries, churches, or any religious institutions targeted, destroyed, dismantled. They were left alone. And it was a command from the Holy Last Messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, that houses of worship should be left alone. They cannot be tampered, they cannot be interfered with, and they should be allowed to practice their faith peacefully. So becoming educated in the history of Islam and not, misinterpreting what Holy Quran is and misinterpreting what Muslims are. Will be followed.
Thank you. I have one more follow-up to that. Ms. Clark, it's for you. This whole threat and everything that's going on with Islamberg, something similar happened in South Carolina, but the attack actually followed through. What is your response to the courts deeming this attack as a mental health issue? And it seems as if that's the path that Doggart's trying to go down too. Just what is your response to that, and specifically relating to things that could be considered as religious hate crimes?
That is definitely a concern. The fact that, the mental evaluation is being considered. And it is something that we have noticed, not just us, but many in this country have noticed a pattern in how cases unfold depending on who has committed the crime. And as was stated earlier, all individuals who have committed crimes such as plots or attacks against innocent people should be treated the same. They should be prosecuted in the same way. And that is what leads to deterrence of these horrible actions.
I have one for either of the attorneys. There's talk about this being the first of its kind, this lawsuit. Why is that? Is it because it's brought under the FACE Act, or could you just explain a little further?
So yes, our understanding is that there's never been a case where the FACE Act has been used to protect a mosque, and I've heard that it's been used once in the 22 years or so that it's been in an act of law, possibly to protect a synagogue. I think the reason that the FACE Act hasn't been used, and of course when people commit these crimes, there are other laws that they can be prosecuted under, trespass or harassment, and I'm sure that justice is being served in some capacity by using those other laws available, federal or state. But with laws like this, there's a political connotation as well as to how they're being used by different governmental bodies, how they're being used by the federal government, by the state government, and sometimes in order to stay out of uncharted territory with sort of the political climate that an administration might be in, they may make the decision not to use a particular set of laws a particular way. So I think that's the only reason it hasn't been used in these years. But there's nothing that keeps anybody who, as I mentioned, has the authority to bring this case, to bring the case. That is the Department of Justice. On the state side, that's the attorneys general. And then if that doesn't work or doesn't work the way you like, of course, the houses of worship also have an independent right to bring the case, and that's what we've brought as a civil suit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
So could you clarify what types of outcome are you expecting to get from the court?
Yes. The number one relief that we're looking for is an injunction against the named defendants and the unnamed defendants and their cohort. What we see on our face, on the face of the complaints, are Robert Doggart and William Tint. But there's a whole group of people who support them, believe in their mission, and cheer them on. We want an injunction against every single last one of them from coming to any of our properties, doing this to any of us, and to any other faith-based community. That's our primary request of this court and the jury that will eventually hear the case.
Is there a hearing date set yet?
Yes, July 1st is scheduled for the initial hearing, which is sort of a housekeeping conference with the judge. It's a scheduling conference with the judge, right here in Binghamton.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tahira, are the other 9 going to be identified by the FBI, and will local law enforcement been notified who they are?
I don't know how much local law enforcement know about those other 9 individuals, and we're currently working, and we're going to use the process of this case to have them identified to us through the defendants or through law enforcement.
What's the reason why they haven't been identified to date?
I'm not sure. Initially, the criminal complaint against Robert Doggart was sealed, and there was some secrecy around that, so I'm not really sure.
And is that usual, that kind of secrecy?
Possibly. They say that when you have certain types of allegations made against defendants in order to protect the integrity of the investigation, sometimes it proceeds that way. But the case is not sealed anymore, and it's been public since the end of April last year.
So there was a previous court date set for Mr. Doggart in January, and it's been pushed back. What have been the reasons that the trial down in Kentucky has been moved back?
Well, when the prosecutor requested the mental evaluation of Doggart, that put a hold on things. And once he was, well, I guess the defense tried to block the mental evaluation. And so there were a couple of hearings. But once he was committed to the Federal Medical Center in Lexington, the warden requested additional time for evaluation due to a backlog. So whereas previously there was a hearing scheduled for March 28th, that has been continued, and the next hearing in a criminal case will take place June 3rd.
And to add to that, previously, just briefly, he was fine. He was fine when he was plotting to blow up, to destroy, to kill American Muslims. But now he has to go through a mental evaluation. Now he's crazy. He wasn't crazy before, but now he's crazy.
In terms of the timing of his plot, it was happening at the same time he was running for Congress. I think that's where it's going.
Generally speaking, has the community seen an increase in threats or perceived threats as a result of perhaps some of the rhetoric coming from some of the presidential candidates? Have you all seen an uptick in perceived threats toward the community?
Unfortunately, we have. The threats have not stopped or slowed down. They've only escalated. And it's I know it's a lot of media here, but, a lot of mainstream media, Fox News and the like, have continued to spread misinformation about Islamberg and about Muslims, you know, and that in part, that propaganda, you know, fueled and incited more hate for these individuals to, quote unquote, take the law into their own hands, you know, and attempt to, you know, we're going to march down there. John Ritzheimer from Arizona was the same story. You understand? He was informed, and his information, you know, he received off of the internet, off of Fox News. So he decides to march on down to Hancock, New York, Holy Islamberg, in an attempt to, you know, take the law into his own hands. Fortunately, through our, you know, grassroots and, you know, work and networking and intelligence, we were able to inform law enforcement of his plot, and they were able to contact him and apprehend and stop him from crossing state lines.
When you say misinformation, were you referring to Wayne Simmons by any chance?
Wayne Simmons, I think we all know the fraud, whom worked as a supposed CIA intelligence officer and terrorist analyst expert for what, 20 years, 15, 20 years, and he himself had commented on Fox News, you know, a few times that Islamberg was a terrorist training camp, that there were terrorist training camps being conducted in Islamberg, and that information and those baseless accusations and untruths is what prompted a lot of this as well.
And as to Wayne Simmons, he's currently facing federal charges. He's been charged with in connection with his fraud. He had impersonated someone who had served in the CIA, and that's one of the ways that he got his credentials to sit on Fox News, and he actually ended up getting some contracts with the U.S. government under the lie that he had served previously. One of the things, in addition to the threats that the communities face, one of the good things that has come from our being vocal about this is that it's allowed us to strengthen relationships with neighbors and friends. It's allowed us to identify and make new neighbors and friends, and that's across the country. It's wonderful. It's also allowed us to strengthen and enhance our relationship with law enforcement, which is another wonderful thing. We're sorry that it had to come from this event, but we're grateful to have it.
But even before these events, the continuous, you know, we have been working side by side, and, you know, the interaction and communication and constant, consistent working relationship with law enforcement, state, federal, you know, local, you know, is proof also of, you know, they say Islamberg is a gated community. How is Islamberg a gated community, locked off community, where we interact with law enforcement on Islamberg on a regular basis? It's open. It's been open. Many media outlets have been to Islamberg, have aired stories and conducted and completed documentaries on Islamberg. You know, so it's not a gated community. Of course, if your community and your family was threatened, if you received death threats, what would you do? Wouldn't you lock your door? Wouldn't you lock your gate? Wouldn't you be more aware and you know, cognizant of, you know, who's coming and going? So it's not gated, it's not locked, it's not closed. It's always been open. But of course, you know, as American Muslims that have been targeted, and Muslims in general, we take the necessary precautions in working with law enforcement to make sure that the safety and security of our people are looked after.
What do you guys think it will take to turn this around? There has obviously been an increase in Islamophobia, but even if this guy gets locked up for 20 years, what's to prevent somebody else from coming and just being a copycat? Like, what do you guys think actually needs to happen in order for?
Well, as we mentioned, the key is unity. Key is unity in coming together and, you know, and stopping this. They'll never be able to destroy, as we mentioned, the ethnicity, the cultural, you know, America was built on and established by these things. So it's up to us, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, to continue a working relationship, to bridge the gap, to build, and establish and strengthen those relationships on a regular, consistent basis, to not respond to when I say respond, I mean taking the law into your own hands or acting irrationally, you understand? Because that's what they want. They want to incite, us to respond so they can say, look, I told you this is who they were. So for us, it's about the work and continuing our interfaith work, with other faith-based groups.
I have a few questions for the lawyers about the Doggart's accomplices. In the original criminal complaint, there's a wiretap quote from March 26, 2015, from a South Carolina individual. Do you have reason to believe that's William Tint speaking, or is that some other South Carolina individual? I have the quote here if you want me to read some of it. It's not pretty. If we get in there with a 10-man team and take out a 20, 30-man crack troop, that's going to show them something, make them think twice about which town, who the hell they're messing with. That's attributed to a South Carolina individual. Have you been informed about if that was Tint or not?
Yes, it did make reference to a South Carolina individual, and as we know, William Tint was facing charges in South Carolina as a result of the Doggart plot, but we cannot assume, because we have not had access to all of the information, we cannot assume that quote can be attributed to him and him alone. There could be another person in South Carolina.
And that figure 9 or 10 that we often hear as the number of Jane and John Does named in your suit, does that figure come from Doggart himself, claims he made about having a 9 or 10-man militia, or does the FBI sort of validate that and say, yeah, we've had 10 voices on these wiretaps, not included in the complaint, but do you understand?
The FBI hasn't validated much with us regarding the allegation and the complaints due to the fact that there's still an ongoing investigation. Much of the information that we have come across has come from the complaint, and at this time we're leaving the possibilities open, our options open, in reference to the filing of this lawsuit.
And with respect to the question, the number, we did get it from the affidavit from the FBI.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. It was just it was unclear from that affidavit whether that was Doggart's claim or whether they have 9 or 10 voices on the wiretaps. I assume you're going to be trying to get larger wiretap transcripts through discovery from the suit, and that's probably one of the benefits.
Definitely, and that's one of the benefits of filing suit, because then we're engaging by a different set of rules instead of just the rules of asking nicely for more information. Now we're entitled to it under this cause of action.
Are you concerned that the FBI will use ongoing investigation as a way of at least delaying discovery far into the future?
That's an option. That's a possibility. But we plan to use the tools that we have available to us in this case to get the information necessary for us to be